It has been quite an emotional day. In his testimony a bit earlier, Murdaugh adamant he did not shoot his wife or his son.
Mr. Murdaugh, did you take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out on June 7th or any day or any time?
No, I did not.
Did you shoot a 300 blackout into her head, causing her death?
Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime, ever.
Elliot Williams, Diane Gallagher are still with us. CNN's Gene Casares also joins our coverage. And Gene, you've covered a lot of trials, and when you put a defendant on the stand, you're taking a risk. Sometimes you build up a timeline and then you ask the question, did you do it? Right out of the box, the defense attorneys asked Alec Murdaugh. What did you make of that?
Well, they got right to the heart of it, and they also got to the heart of all the lies, because there have been a lot of lies that the prosecution has brought out in this case. The most important lie of all is the one that he said he was never down at the kennels close in time to when the murders happened. And he now admitted it, and he admitted it saying, I was on drugs, and we know he had an addiction. We've heard about that through the majority of this trial. And he said, I would develop a paranoia. And at that moment, there was a paranoia, and I did not tell the truth that I had been down there. What's interesting about that is that, remember, he is talking to a jury. And that jury, they have friends, they have relatives, they have lives. How many of them have been touched by someone that had an addiction? And if so, did that addiction produce lies from those friends or family members? So some jurors may understand what he's saying. Others may not take it as fact and think that's just an excuse, but I think it's an important point. But it's his credibility that is on the line right now, because the jury can't take notes. They can just watch and listen, and now they're looking at him very close. I don't think they're too far away from him, and really judging everything he says with a credibility factor.
Number one, it's a gamble to put a defendant on the stand testifying in his own defense. In this case, given the way Diane described and the way we heard the prosecution lay out, he repeatedly said he was not at the kennels, and they had the video on his son's phone proving he was indeed at the kennels. A, did they have a choice? And what did you make of the idea? I lied because I was paranoid because of a drug addiction.
Well, so let's talk about why you don't put a defendant on the stand. You're putting somebody on who, number one, can't control the story. They're going to have a prosecutor, in an hour, whenever the prosecution comes, that will pick apart every moment of his testimony. Now, what's a little bit different in this case is that you have a murder where, number one, you don't have a murder weapon, you don't have fingerprints, you don't have DNA, you don't have eyewitnesses. So the prosecution actually doesn't have a particularly strong case at the moment. Maybe there's an argument to be made for putting the defendant on the stand. Now, you got a problem because he lied to the cops. This is South Carolina, and a defendant who has admitted that he lied to the police. And I think that's a point that jurors likely are not to take very kindly to. And again, we're seeing his side of the story here. There's going to come a moment when that prosecutor is going to put him on the stand and walk him through every one of his statements, and it's not going to be good for him.
And Diane, to that point, again, the trial plays out, and we learned late yesterday and then this morning confirmed that Alec Murdaugh, yes, indeed, would take the stand in his own defense. Has his legal team explained to you, to reporters, why they made that calculation? Was it the plan from day one, or was it because of the way the trial played out up to this point?
So, John, I can tell you that sources close to the defense's legal strategy have been telling me since day one that it was an option, that Alec Murdaugh wanted to take the stand in his own defense. And look, it's sort of gone back and forth from he's not going to testify, he'll only testify if he needs to, but they've never changed in saying that he wanted to testify. Yesterday, my colleague Randy Kay and I, going back and forth with our sources, were being told essentially, yeah, we think it's going to happen, and then no, hold off. We're still trying to make this decision that Alec Murdaugh only himself can make, that he was still thinking it over in the jail cell. I was told this morning around 6 o'clock that it was more likely than not that he would in fact take the stand. There was a moment before the jury came in when his attorney, Dick Harpootlian, was speaking with the judge. And look, he seemed to be hinting at the fact that because the prosecution can bring in questions about all of these other charges. Remember, Alec Murdaugh is facing 99 other charges in addition to these murder charges, most of them dealing with theft and fraud and financial misdeeds. They're going to be able to ask him about that. And he's not been convicted of any of those yet. And they seem to say, look, we don't want him to get into this. The judge said, look, they can ask those questions. We'll deal with it as they come, question by question. But his attorneys seem worried he could incriminate himself in other crimes as he was trying to defend himself from this one. One last thing to remember, John, look, he's a disbarred attorney, but he is an attorney. He's been taking diligent notes throughout this. They think that Alec Murdaugh is, we've heard people say, charming, good with people. Alec Murdaugh obviously thinks that this is his only option here to try and convince the jury he did not kill his wife and his son.
Excellent point from Diane Gallagher, back in the room with Elliot Williams. To that point, the prosecution is trying to say this was calculated, cold-blooded, deliberate, and that this man is off the path of what normal human behavior, that he was opening text messages, that he Googled a restaurant after he sees the lifeless bodies of his wife and one of his sons. He was trying to make the point in his testimony that he was trying to call friends, and that was inadvertent. But again, they have to use his testimony to rebut some of the powerful, both the specifics, the timeline, and that sort of character question.
Yeah, and you're hearing something, there's a term for this. It's called fronting. You're like sort of the dirt in your story. These are all facts that are quite bad for him. The defense has to be the one to put them on the record, because if you give that to the prosecution and have, like I said earlier, the prosecution controlling the narrative about calling the pizza place or wherever it was or Googling things, it looks far worse to the jury. So that's why they're trying to get it out there. But again, look, the prosecution, what they've got right here is a motive in light of all those other crimes that they're accusing him of having done. There's a motive there. The problem is that they just don't seem to have a way to link him to the actual murders, and that's the biggest defect in the prosecution's case thus far.